Hello. In this video, I'm going to offer a recipe for teriyaki sauce that you can make yourself. And I'll also provide some suggestions and a recipe for broccoli teriyaki that you can make either plain to serve with something else, or I'll provide some options if you'd like to add mushrooms or a protein to it. If you're going to make the sauce, then you'll need these ingredients: some soy sauce, tamari or liquid aminos, a vinegar, and I do recommend either apple cider vinegar or a wine or a rice vinegar. These are a little bit sweeter. A plain white vinegar is going to provide a sharper flavor. You'll need some kind of sweetener, and I will offer brown sugar in mine, but you have other options. I do recommend, though, that it be an actual sugar-based sweetener and not some kind of substitute like stevia. In other videos, I have mentioned that actual sugars, sucrose, glucose, fructose, these are much better at enhancing flavors. So you're even better off just using a fruit syrup than using something like stevia. You don't have to have it, but I do recommend some sesame oil for a bit more complex flavor. You'll want some filtered tap water, filtered so that it doesn't have too much of the different kinds of compounds in it that can interfere with the cooking process. And then you'll also want either some fresh or some dried garlic and ginger. And you'll want some cornstarch or arrowroot powder if you would like to thicken the sauce. So reasons to make your own. I like to make my own because I enjoy making different kinds of sauces. The kitchen's going to smell great when it's done, and you'll enjoy the food even more if the room that you're eating in has the smell of the sauce before you've even cooked the food. You can also control things like sugar, sodium, and other ingredients, either because of your preferences or because of dietary needs. I don't always like strong flavors. I don't necessarily want a very sweet teriyaki sauce. So this recipe is actually relatively mild when it comes to sweetness. And it's also lower on the sodium range, so that it's really more about a balance of flavors. And the other thing is you can just make as much or as little as you need. I don't necessarily want to eat teriyaki all the time. I like it, but I like variety. So I can make a small amount and it will keep in the fridge. If you use fresh garlic and ginger, it will only keep for about a week. But if you use garlic powder and ginger powder, then you'll find that it will keep for a few months, actually. So here are the ingredients that you need for the sauce in actual amounts. And basically, you just need to have a small saucepan and combine the soy sauce, the brown sugar or other sweetener, the vinegar, the sesame oil, and then your garlic and ginger in that small saucepan, and just stir to mix everything. And then on about medium to medium high, bring it to a simmer and reduce the heat just to maintain the simmer. While you're waiting for that to simmer, you can go ahead, if you're going to use the thickener, and just whisk together some water with the cornstarch or the arrowroot powder. And then you'll have that ready to go when the sauce is ready to simmer. So you can see this is what the sauce looks like when you've just mixed everything initially and you haven't added any of the cornstarch or arrowroot slurry. And that's what the slurry looks like when you whisk it in a small bowl. Once the sauce itself has come to a simmer and you have the slurry ready to go, if you're going to use the slurry, go ahead and stir it in and keep stirring it, whisking it preferably until it starts to thicken. If you are not going to use the slurry to thicken it, I recommend allowing it to simmer for about 5 minutes. That helps to bring out the flavors before you turn it off and remove it from the burner. If you're going to actually use the thickener, you'll find that it's going to cook for about that amount of time. And once it has thickened, you can go ahead and remove it from the heat and allow it to cool. This is what it looks like once it's thickened. It's not extremely thick, but you will notice fairly soon after just maybe 2 or 3 minutes, if it's on a constant simmer, that it will start to thicken for you just a bit. And that's all you really need for it to be thick enough that it will coat the spoon and stay on it. And again, it's not absolutely necessary if you'd prefer to avoid the cornstarch or the arrowroot powder. What the benefit of having it thicker, which is the way you're probably going to find the bottled sauces you would buy, is that it does stick to the vegetables, the chicken or the beef, or whatever it is you're cooking with. It will stick to those a bit more instead of ending up being at the bottom of the pan, like if you just used a plain soy sauce. So I do thicken mine because I like it to stick to the vegetables like that. And once you've removed it from the stovetop, just allow it to cool completely and transfer it to an airtight container. If you used fresh garlic and ginger, it will probably only keep for about a week. You might end up using it fairly quickly. I made half a recipe because I don't use a ton. This recipe makes probably just under a cup. So I made a half a recipe and I have just under half a cup, which is enough for probably 2 different dishes for me. The recipe I'm going to suggest calls for about a 1/4 cup of teriyaki sauce. So you could do that 4 times if you made a whole recipe of the broccoli recipe that I recommend. And if you do like I did this time, I just used dried spices because I'd like it to keep a little bit longer since I don't use teriyaki sauce as much. I know that I can keep this through the spring and it should be fine in the refrigerator if it stays at a constant temperature and it's airtight. Another option is you can freeze it if you want to use fresh ingredients, but you want to keep some of it for a longer period. You could always freeze some. That would also help to keep it for a longer period. So this is what the sauce looks like as you're cooking. As soon as you add the slurry, you can tell that it's got the cornstarch in it, and then you can see how much thicker it is when it's bubbling after a few minutes. So that's a basic teriyaki sauce recipe. It's not extremely salty. It's not extremely sweet. You can always sweeten it a bit more if you'd like and add more sugar or other kind of sweetener. You can add salt if you want it to be salty, but I like to start with just the salt that's in the soy sauce. I use a low sodium soy sauce, and that's enough to keep the flavor enhanced. Otherwise, I will just add some salt as I'm cooking. You can do other things with it. There are other recipes out there that you can look for. Some of them will call for Japanese wines like mirin, which is a sweet rice wine, or you could use a sweet grape wine and substitute that for the vinegar. You can also find other recipes that call for even a bit more than what you would put in this recipe. And the more you put in, the more it's going to be sweet naturally. So you might even just think about reducing the sugars a little bit, or at least paying attention to that. You could add some red pepper flakes or even some ground pepper if you'd like to make it a little bit hot. What I did was add a chili to the dish that I made, and that helps to give it some balance of flavor. You could see probably in the amount that I showed you here that I put some toasted sesame seeds in mine this time for something different, because I really like sesame, so you could add that as well. What I did was I took it off the burner when it was done and I put the sesame seeds in and let them be in the sauce for a few hours before I made my broccoli recipe. And you can just try different flavors. I've talked in other videos about how different sweeteners have different flavor profiles. So depending on what you might be looking for, different kinds of sweeteners, including different varieties of honey, will have different kinds of flavor profiles. So you could try different things to suit your own taste. In this recipe, I used brown sugar because I like that rich flavor that goes along with the soy sauce and the sweetness of the apple cider vinegar that I used and the richness of the sesame. So once you have your teriyaki sauce, you can use it for different recipes. There are plenty of things out there. You might even have some recipes you already like and now would just like to try making your own sauce to use with your own favorite recipes. If you're looking for something easy, here is a suggestion for what you can do. I made this a little while ago and it's really flavorful. I just sauteed a small red onion in some olive oil and added some garlic, ginger, and I used a serrano green chili, which is a bit hotter than a jalapeno, just to give it a little bit of a balance since the teriyaki sauce is a little bit sweet. And I cooked those for a couple of minutes, and then I did broccoli and mushrooms. So my mushrooms were fresh and my broccoli was frozen. So I cooked the mushrooms first for a few minutes until they started to get tender. But if you're using fresh broccoli, I recommend cooking that first for probably upwards of 7 minutes until it gets to the tenderness that you prefer. And then you could add the mushrooms when the broccoli is getting to where it needs to be, because the mushrooms don't take as long. If you want very tender mushrooms, you could put them in first before cooking raw broccoli. It depends on what you like, but I used frozen broccoli that I didn't need to really cook, so I did the mushrooms first. And once everything is at the right tenderness to your preference, you just add some teriyaki sauce for about every 3 cups of broccoli, or about 1.5 cups maybe, and 1.5 cups of broccoli and mushrooms. You'll want about 1/4 cup of teriyaki sauce. You might add a bit more if you really like teriyaki, but that was plenty for me. And I had about 3 cups or so of the two together, the mushrooms and the broccoli. And then you can add some salt and pepper to taste. You don't need to add chilies. You could add some black pepper and or white pepper. Those would also give it a little bit of heat to balance out the sweetness of the sauce. There are many things you can do with it, and you can serve it with rice or with noodles. This is what my broccoli and mushroom teriyaki recipe looks like after I've cooked everything. So these are the ingredients that I used in the recipe that were fresh: my broccoli and mushrooms, but also a sliced red onion and some fresh garlic, ginger, and a serrano chili. And this is what it looks like when it's done. I made a small amount. This recipe is a relatively small amount. It's a good side dish with something else. You could obviously make more if you need to, but there's probably about 3 cups of recipe, right? Because of the amount of produce that you use will yield about the amount you're going to get. So think about how much you'd like to eat, and you could always double the recipe if you wanted to. So I already said that one option is if you want to do half and half, you could do half broccoli and half mushrooms. To follow the other proportions of ingredients the way they already are, you could just cut the broccoli amount in half and do the same amount of mushrooms, or you could double the other ingredients and do the same amount of mushrooms as broccoli, 3 cups of each. Another option is if you want to add a protein like some chicken, beef, pork, or tofu. For about every pound of protein, you'll want 3 cups of broccoli, and then increase the teriyaki sauce to at least 1/3 of a cup. You might want more depending on your preferences. It's better to start with a little less, and you can always add more if you want. And do cook that protein first until it's tender and browned. And then you can follow the remaining steps as directed. So I hope that the recipe suggestions have been helpful here and that you're able to enjoy your own homemade teriyaki sauce. It's frozen food month right now, so this is a good way to maybe just use some of those frozen foods, especially if you're getting some good deals at the grocery store.